This syntax here, you're telling it that root is whatever is labeled with Linux. So when we see this boot, which you will see, it will wait for a few seconds while it waits for the devices to settle, and it will mount the device that's labeled with root as the eventual root directory of the running system. The initramfs.image is a usually gzipped CPIO archive, which is like a tar file, but it's a different format, and just contains a list of files. Because I'm using Arch Linux, there are tools that generate these for me, and if you use Arch Linux, you've probably used it, or at least configured the makeinitcpio.conf. If you're using Ubuntu or Red Hat, every system has its own solution for doing this. But what you could do to get a bootable system is to just steal a VM Linux kernel from somewhere and the corresponding initramfs Linux image. Technically speaking, all you need to do to boot into the kernel are these two things. Now, what will happen is it will get to the point where it needs to mount this, and it will mount it, but it won't find bin init, which is the first process that gets loaded, and it will just fail there. But it will still drop you into this, which will have a bare minimum of CPLS Bourne shell. So you'll at least be able to still prove that it's bootable. Hey, Cliff, I think that a friend of mine's here. Hello, William. You're on the air. Okay, someone's coming. Cheers. So, that said, I'm going to do that with my kernel image and my thing just to show you what that looks like. I think that the projector will continue working in my booting. So we'll do that.
Can I ask maybe a silly question?
Sure.
Instead of the sudo's all the time, why not sudo -s and make it persistent?
It's -i, but I just don't particularly care, and I never want to leave a root shell running. So it's going to ask me for my password every time I've been idle for 3 seconds. And when the friend of mine who's being let in here comes in here, you'll see why.
I was about to mention that same point, William.
Also, I use sudo edit. Really genuine point. I use sudo edit to edit files because my Vim config is really massive and customized, and I don't want it running as root. So sudo edit invokes my text editor as my user, lets me change the file, and then copies it over the original one, which is really nice because I don't want my Vim config requires so many open source things that I've just pulled down from people's GitHubs. There could be a root exploit in it. So it's really better if my Vim never runs as root, and I really don't like using my non-configured Vim. So if I'm doing any serious text editing or pasting from the star buffer, I want my Vim. Okay, so we're going to not have the stuff in boot. So go. And now I just need to copy over those two things, which I'll do from the running system. I won't even involve the other one. So here we have exelinux.conf, which we've just written, and we're going to copy in my Linux kernel from my currently running system. Yes, that was done. And whoops. So we have both of those, which are 3.2 megs and 3.7. The kernel is actually bigger than its initRD on my configuration. Now, if I just did this, the general problem is the set of modules that get compiled into the initRD are going to be very specific for this install. So if you wanted to do this to answer the question I hope to answer for Wayne Pollock, is you would actually steal the Linux kernel and the initRD from one of those fancy live CDs and try hacking those in and getting it to run. I think that would actually work. You might, if they're calling out to something that's supposed to exist on the root file system that's not standard, you'd have to make sure that exists too, or edit their initRD startup, because inside the initRD there's also a script that gets executed first that does a couple of things, including pivot root. Now, pivot root, just briefly, when you boot, this gets unpacked into a ramfs file system. So you're still using RAMFS file system, but only for booting. And this happens on most distros now, anytime you boot. I believe all common distros start out in a RAMFS. And it's in charge of configuring the kernel, loading modules, which it has with it, and getting the system into its final state. Now, that means that the contents of this go into a RAMFS that its root is slash. Now, obviously, the slash when you're running isn't that. So what happens is you mount this init RAMFS mounts your hard drive or your device that you specified here as slash new root, and then a command that I can pull up command page for, called pivot root, is called with the new root and where to put the old one. So you create a directory inside new root called old root, and you say mount or a pivot root slash new root, because it's underneath that, and then space slash new root slash old root. And it's kind of confusing talking about this, but basically they switch. And then you unmount the old one, the RAMFS, and it disappears and you never need it again until you reboot. So generally, distros have a lot of customization in this process. There's different things. Arch Linux is really simple. That is to say, it doesn't have a lot of niceties in it. So this will, in general, copying from an Arch Linux install will just work on at least the same hardware. Watch me, famous last words. But I have 2 devices to boot from right now, so and one of them is confirmed as working. So, what? Oh, I'm still in there, aren't I? And UDisks does not require my root password, which is really good. Should have actually done that first, because those 2 unmounts could have hung quite badly. Actually, I don't need to do for that either. Under the current security policies, the user that owns the console is allowed to execute reboot without authenticating. Is it not? Did you break it already? Normally on boot on my desktop, it actually shows. All right, we can fix this actually.
Function F7?
Not on the BIOS. It doesn't work that way. Graphics device. Boot device. All right, projector. You get signal now.
Yep. You get signal.
The thing is, I have to look over my shoulder now. So, I love this. It gives me a submenu for the USB HDD device. So I don't know which one it's going to boot from right now. Cool. I'm going to guess it's booting from the first one. Yeah, so this is my first one, so I was actually going to show you a working demo first. Display just jumped over here. Oh, no, it's in both. So this is my running system. Which I may have to root. I thought I set it to a particular password. Oh, there I did. Just to prove that what I'm mounted on, I don't have a GUI on here, but I'll show you that my dev, for one, you can see it's DevSDB. And DevSDB is the one that has a Linux and a FAT32 partition, whereas DevSDA is the one that's the internal hard drive and has quite a few more partitions. So the one we're mounted, as you can see, DevSDB is actually on /mount, which is our VFAT partition, because the way I did it on this one is I wanted to have a big drive, so you can still take this and plug it into a Windows computer and dump a bunch of files on it. But then when you want a real OS, you can do this. Eventually, I should get graphics working on this, and because the NuVal project, which is the open source drivers for NVIDIA, the Intel project, and, well, Radeon's still a bit of a problem, but in general, you'll get good enough graphics support out of the box on a random computer you plug this into. Not good enough for running games, but the bus bandwidth of USB 2 is going to be your biggest threat anyway. But in general, you have a safeguard if you need to do some kind of system rescue stuff. And while I don't have Wi-Fi on yet, I, in theory, can connect to the Wi-Fi because I have Wi-Fi packages installed. And if I were to connect to the Wi-Fi, I could then, oh, that's pretty cool. So, which one is the one here? Guess
Guess
one?
one.
Yes, one.
Of course, you'll need to go through the web browser page. to
Yeah,
Mhm.
Captain
actually
Morgan's
use it.
installed.
Hmm?
It's still connected.
It says connected, but it doesn't do nothing.
Yeah, but you can't get out. You can't get out.
You can DNS tunnel it. It lets outside DNS requests go through without authenticating. Not that I told you that.
Whatever.
Anyway, I'm not going to bother with that because
Dreadfully slow.
I'm not talking about where you're actually going to a random DNS. I'm saying it lets you go to your own DNS server on port 53. If your DNS server happens to be OpenVPN, okay, so this is ARTS, and this is going to fail, but hopefully it'll fail enough of it in the process where for my purposes of illustration. Error loading operating system. I did run into this. Now, exe Linux install is supposed to install the bootloader, but what I had to do when I ran into this is DD a MBR file into the device itself. No, don't use the first Linux kernel. I also have an install of the git head, or relatively recent git head of the Linux kernel, which is not something I generally boot into. I'm currently trying to figure out, patch a bug in the new wireless underlying Mac 802.11 framework, because I have issues with dual band Wi-Fi at my house. And I'm already connected to my access points. I already have proper internet access. Yay! So back to ARTS thing, which is now going to be SDB1. So it's mounted, and all those are in there. So the error we saw, I'm pretty certain that this is what I did to fix that. I don't know why. I'm going to have to read the man page, and I'm going to post a how-to about this, I think, because there's not anything existing that explains what's going on. It's always use these set of scripts I've written that make assumptions about your install to get a bootable thing. Okay, so it would also probably be sensible to try using a virtual machine to boot these USB devices, but doing that has actually been fraught with difficulty. At least with VirtualBox, I haven't tried KVM yet. I'm really glad that my computer boots this fast, because this would be almost an unthinkable. And when I started coming to Slug, just 11 years ago, doing this kind of demo where I'm rebooting multiple times, it would have taken our entire time. Actually, on some of the hardware I still have, it would still take that long, because it takes like 10 minutes to boot. Woo! So, installing. Good. The resume thing is it's trying to find a resume thing for hardware suspend, but here's where it's going to get to. I should change that. Can't find device label equal Linux. If it had gotten past that point, the next point that it would reach is that it doesn't have an init to execute. So I think I have a static copy of BusyBox. Does anyone here know what BusyBox, or anyone here not know what BusyBox is? BusyBox BusyBox is a single executable that includes personalities of multiple standard Unix programs. So you can, if you name it SH, then it acts like bin SH. If you name it LS, it acts like LS. So you get one executable with basically all the userland utilities that you could want. It's used for embedded projects like routers and stuff. It also suits our purpose for trying to explain the bare bones of getting a device to boot. But I'll just take a step back. We have accomplished booting a kernel, if not a running system, with two commands, the dd and use ext linux install, and copying a kernel and an image over. So it's fiddly in the details, but there's no magic. There's no black magic from booting from a USB device. It's no different than booting, at least these days, from booting from an IDE hard drive or a SATA hard drive or some kind of weird fiber channel setup. It's just a block device. There's nothing magical about a live USB distro. There's no reason for live USB distros to be read-only these days. Pet peeve, I guess. Because you want to customize them. I want to customize them on the fly. I want it to just be a system that I can put into another computer. So with that said, Sam,
Well, you can do that with Puppy.
will you try booting this? Well, Puppy is one solution, but Puppy is you're configuring all of your machines. I want to walk up to a machine. Try booting from that. I guarantee it won't hurt your computer.
Especially if you take your hard drive out.
You know, if I ever say that to you, you still say no.
Yes.
Well, when the disc has Dr. Kevorkian written on the outside.
Let's see how many thumb drives I can put in here. No, I'll handle Pete's in a minute.
Or D-band. D-band's always good.
I guarantee it's not D-band. When I have run into the problems that Sam may experience with this, that do need to be accounted for, is it may not find a device with a label, because he's using the good one now. He's using the one that successfully booted online, so it should work. Or it may not have kernel modules. Oh crap, I'm booting the old kernel. Or two new kernel. I mean, it still works, it's just... I don't actually think it's that recent. It's like a week old. I think it was slightly before 3.11. Linux for Work Groups was released. Yeah, that's the official name, or jokingly of. So first of all, what's our root? What I really need to do is write a shell alias for vi. When I try a new file, then I can't edit. It just automatically replaces it with sudo edit. So what's the name of our disk? Art. And what else do we need? We can actually simplify this quite a bit, because I don't know what it's going to try running well, it's going to try running bin init. I'm pretty certain it's configured to run bin init, so we'll give it a bin init. There's my BusyBox.
What does it mean?
What's BusyBox linked to is not a dynamic executable. It means it's a static executable. Everything it needs, everything it needs, it's compiled into, except maybe libc. We'll find out.
Google Chrome? That's what the website.
Ooh, I wonder if my thing will, did it boot by the way, Sam?
It's just log in.
Mm-hmm.
It's based off of it's Chrome OS, which is based off Linux.
So Sam, by the way, has got it booting on his very different hardware from mine, at least a different manufacturer. What's the chipset?
I don't know.
It's ATI Graphics, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, so different graphics. Oh, well, we don't have X running. We'll still find that whole ball of wax once the later installment of X running happens. Is Mick missing?
Looks like it. Yeah, so.
Oh. Oh, well, we'll get to that because he's next week, and I'm going to have to give him the thumb drive. That's which I'll mention at the end of this. So I've got BusyBox copied into there. I'm making a bin directory. I am making a bin directory. And I'm making a symbolic link for BusyBox to bin init. And bin sh, just cuz. And bin bash, just cuz. So if I actually just see if I run those now, right. Darn my overly restrictive UMask. So I just accidentally a command, but I'm fine, honestly.
There's a BusyBox executable on that directory.
Yes, I realized my mistake after the fact. So while it looks like you're copying an actual file, you're actually putting the content of the symbolic link in. So it has to be from the reference point of where the symbolic link is. Once again, damn my overly restrictive default UMask.
It's there for a reason.
So bash isn't actually going to work because it doesn't have a applet for that. I thought it did. All right, so this should be enough to get a basic kind of sort of running system. Maybe. The good thing to note, you don't have to change any, you don't have to run any commands after you have the ext Linux bootloader installed. You just edit the config file. The only time you need to rerun, to copy over the bootloader or rerun the install is if you had a new version of the ext Linux. I, by the way, am aware, and I'm working on this, that this whole booting thing I'm doing is referred to as BIOS booting or the legacy option on most new hardware. And that, why is it looking, okay. Anyway, it's not necessarily going to be the way it's supported on all future hardware, but this in general principle, you sticking with the ext Linux for your bootable device needs will work because the ext Linux 6, which was just released in, I believe, August, has support for UEFI, and I believe that there is a signed version of because I think, is it Red Hat? Does anyone know if it's Red Hat that went with SysLinux as their bootloader? Everyone's picking their own bootloader and getting it signed for the new secure hardware thing. No? Well, anyway, I believe that ext Linux is one of the ones that this is using. So what we have happened here is the next error. The init ramfs that we compiled doesn't have the